Luke Cage regains his old power. Hulkbuster gains some consistency. Heimdall gets a small power buff. Spider-Man 2099 gets a pretty large alternative change to his stats. And then goes from a 1-2 to a 3-5. So pretty interesting changes. Let's get into it. How you doing? So today we've got our OTA patch discussion. February 1st, we've got 5 changes for you. Lots of interesting ones. It's mostly buffs across the board. Even the nerf that they're talking about, I think, is a potential buff, but we'll get into it. So let's begin. All right, this OTA is going to be fairly small compared to the last one we had. This one just having a couple of changes, mostly buffs, but there is some theoretical nerfs that we have in there. So first one we're going to talk about will be Luke Cage. So Luke Cage was a card they decided they didn't like the standard of 2 drops being able to shut down late game plans, and that is essentially what Luke Cage did. You played it for 2, and then it would just say, oh, a lot of these counter strategies, they don't work against here. So it was a really good tech card. Decided 2 costs is too cheap for that, so they decided to make it where it only reduces the power in that singular lane. However, that was not very predictable. You couldn't really know exactly where people will play their cards in, and also a lot of the lanes that people are already playing negative power in, you don't really want to add Luke Cage into that particular lane a lot of times. So because of that, Luke Cage really lost a lot of play rate. It wasn't really doing that well stats wise. It wasn't a card people would add in for tech for any reason. It just was not very efficient. So it looks like they looked at the data. Luke Cage is not doing well. They decided to do something different. They would just move it to a 3-drop now and just make it back to its old ability. So now it just affects all the lanes again. I think this is going to be very happy. Some people that like Cerebro maybe might not be as happy, but honestly, Luke Cage wasn't being played in Cerebro anymore because it just wasn't doing that much. So I think this is going to be happier for most tech players. This is going to help a lot. So I think this is a much better version of Luke Cage. The 2-drop one was problematic. It countered a lot of strategies. Now you can start adding this back in. Maybe Shadow King won't be as problematic if you have this kind of thing. So definitely, I think, a right direction for Luke Cage. It was not really seeing any play rate, so happy to see maybe you'll see some more play in some decks now. So yeah, definitely think this is the right direction. Last year, we found Luke Cage having a big impact on the meta game relative to the opportunity cost of playing with him. Yeah. We decided to adjust Luke to be a stronger card that concentrates on one location like armor and learn what that might change. Luke has underperformed with that change, even in the decks we thought would still play the effect happily, such as Cerebro 3. Luke Cage still sucks there. That's funny. So we're taking the other route and returning Luke Cage to the global but at a higher cost. I think this is definitely the right way to go. It kind of seems like 3-drops are where all the tech cards are going to lie, because that's where you can have tech cards not change game plans, right? 3 costs is where a lot of the tech cards, are available to go. If you put it at 2 costs, it's too cheap, and if you put it at 4 costs, it's too expensive. So 3 costs is where you can let it be and be happy. So this makes sense to me. I'm not surprised to see this. Next up, we have Hulkbuster. So this one's a particularly interesting one. They're changing it from a 3-5 to a 2-3. So kind of it lost 2 power, but it's 1 cost cheaper. And I want to talk about their reasoning first. So they said because the strongest destroyed decks by far were all about Deadpool. So it is like saying destroy is statistically a problem for them. We also want to look at weakening some of the best ways to make huge Deadpools. Hulkbuster is definitely one of the better ways to make huge Deadpools. Just adding 5 power into the doubling stat is just very, very strong. It's also a fun card in other strategies like Move and the occasionally Cookie Brew. The most alternative use of Hulkbuster, I would say, was probably into multiple man. Now this change is a nerf to multiple man for sure, right? You play multiple man on 2, and then you play Hulkbuster on 3. You have an 8 power multiple man, and you don't have that anymore. Since the real problem was how much power Hulkbuster was adding to Deadpool, we decided to keep it fairly efficient already and just shrink down the numbers. Hopefully this change actually creates some opportunities to play alongside things like multiple man and Werewolf by Night while weakening Deadpool specifically. We want to keep Hulkbuster a solid card. So they're looking at this like a nerf. I don't buy it personally. I don't look at this as a nerf. I think this is actually a buff to the destroy decks that play Deadpool. Now, the reason I say that is when you look at this, right, you can definitely argue that it will lower the Deadpool in a base way, where normally you'd play Deadpool, maybe you'd Carnage on 2, but a lot of times you don't. So you play Deadpool to 1 power, then you play Hulkbuster, now you have a 6 power Deadpool, then turn 5, turn 6, you would destroy. So you go from 6 to 12, 12 to 24, then very commonly you'd play 24 power Deadpool, and you're generally super happy. Your null's crazy power, especially if you have a X23 on the board, right? So that's the general case, right? They're lowering that down. So if you do that now, you'll go to 8, then you'll destroy. You get 2 destroy procs, 8 to 16. So instead of a 24 power Deadpool, you have a 16 power Deadpool. Still very good, right? Now the issue I have here is now you get to play Hulkbuster on 2. And I think that's a massive deal in terms of the consistency of destroy deck, because with Hulkbuster on 3, you couldn't really triple destroy Deadpool, right? Because you'd Hulkbuster for the 3, then 4 and 5 is when you get your destroy procs off. Now that you can Hulkbuster on 2, you can destroy on 3, you can destroy on 4, and destroy on 5. So theoretically, it's not 16 that's the base, it's 32, right? So turn 1 you play Deadpool, turn 2 you play Hulkbuster, turn 3 you play Carnage, Killmonger, Venom, Deadlock, you know? Turn 4 you play, and turn 4 and 5 you play either of those others, right? So you'll go from 1 to 4 to 8 on the first destroy, 16 on the second destroy, 32 on the third destroy. And that's not really something you could realistically do before. You'd have to like high roll in some way. So I actually think the more common Deadpool number you're going to see is 16 or 32. I think that's like if you play Hulkbuster. So that's bigger than the 24 we were seeing before. So I just don't really buy that this is a nerf. I think this helps, and also just making the card cheaper is nice, because a lot of times if you don't get the X23, if you're playing Hulkbuster, your turn 5 was like tons of 3-cost cards, right? Like Venom's a 3, Deadlock's a 3. What other things people play? All the other cards are 3 drops. So now you can play Hulkbuster into Venom, Hulkbuster into whatever, another destroy tool on 3. You just have more 3-drop tools. So I don't know. They're looking at this like this is a nerf, but I'm skeptical. I'd love to see what the data shows if people are actually just performing better, since you have this like much easier curve to play with Deadpool to have huge numbers. So personally not sold. It's interesting. They did kind of like Dead Destroy is a good deck. It's doing very well, but I don't know if this is the nerf that will fix that, in my opinion. But we'll have to see the data. My current thoughts is this makes Dead Destroy better. That's my current thoughts here, but who knows? So let's move on there. And then next up, we have some couple like nice to have buffs. I think Heimdall could have used a buff a long time ago. Not move decks in general, I keep saying, are struggling. I would definitely try to figure out how to make move an archetype that isn't riddled with consistency issues, which is my main gripe. Where anytime you're trying to get the combo to work, you need to draw the right card into the next right card and make sure you're your move left is right into the card that needs to move left, and your move the last card is right into the card that needs to move last. It's all very specific, and that makes it hard to really predict that you're gonna have some consistency, and also it makes it predictable in terms of like, oh, they have to move left, they have to play left, things like that. Also, like I would say the most popular move deck right now is just Silky Smooth Move. That is just not based on using Heimdall at all. It's just using a lot of the other small move cards. And now that you have Kingpin and now you have Craven, you have a lot of activators for that. So that's more common. I don't really see a lot of Heimdall. I see no Heimdall in my games. I've seen 0 Heimdall this season. Okay, like I don't see Heimdall. It's not a card people really play. But hopefully this might help, and we do have another move change as well. So this is just a nice buff to Heimdall. Not something I think is going to move the needle on move decks, but it's in the right direction for sure. So maybe it helps. In our ongoing evaluation of success cards, we think Heimdall is right for a boost for sure. Having 8 power used to protect Heimdall Shang-Chi, now Shang-Chi threshold increase, we can lightly boost up some of these 8 power big cards for a little oomph. Yeah, I'm sure there's more 6 drops you could boost up like that, but Heimdall's definitely the one in need of it most. So definitely nice to see. Is it even a problem for this to be Shang-Chiable? I don't even know if that's an issue, right? Like, let's say this was like a 610. Is that really an issue? A lot of times the Heimdall lane isn't the one getting like murdered. But who knows? Maybe it matters for sure. And generally this buff is good. And the next one we have is Spider-Man 2099. So this one's getting a pretty interesting change. So it's going from a 4/6, which is honestly not that good stats. It means the 4/6 means you have to get the destroy off for it to be good, and it has to destroy something very good for it to be worth it. And it can only happen once, right? There's no consistency there. So now it's going from a 4/6 to a 5/9. 5/9's definitely better stats. It still does mean that you have to destroy something to be good, but at least the stats are kind of like, they're kind of considerable, I would say, as a 5-drop. So this kind of helps with the Heimdall finish. The one criticism here is that you are kind of relegating this to be a Heimdall card in a lot of cases. I guess you can also make this a Doctor Strange card, because its base stats are high enough that Doctor Strange would hit it. So there's definitely some thought here in terms of making this more playable. So hopefully this might help move decks a little bit. I do think it is a little bit awkward, since a lot of times you're playing things like Cloak on 5, you're playing things like all your move activators on 5. So it makes the turns awkward. I guess you can go use your move activators on 4. Or I guess use your move activators on 4 and then Spider-Man into Heimdall. Or Spider-Man to Doctor Strange, something like that. It definitely makes this card more of a consideration. It was near unplayable in my eyes before, so now maybe this is going to be a little bit more interesting to see. Spider-Man has been a below average card for quite a while. Yes, never one of the worst. That's I bet that's not true. But also not. I mean, okay, let's take that phrase back. The fact that this is not one of the worst cards means that there's some god-awful cards, right? That's maybe more the takeaway. There's bigger problems. We're open to considering more significant adjustments, but in the interim, we've decided to experiment with a stat change. As we know, around Hercules in the update, we like to try and get some big move cards into fighting shape. Yeah, there's not a lot of big moves. A lot of the move cards are like gain stats, right? They're not big themselves, which makes it a little bit weak to cards like Shadow King, where your cards like Dagger, your cards like Vulture, right? Human Torch, all those type of cards, right? They just get destroyed by a single Shadow King. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. 2099 represents an opportunity for X to explore that kind of effect and style line seems to exist in that space while potentially giving an underperforming cards some new life. I do think this does make both Heimdall and Spider-Man 2099 more interesting, and maybe we'll see some Heimdall decks with these two changes. I'm still of the opinion that you have to prove it first as a move deck for me to have blind faith. I've seen too many times just move decks not perform even with new cards and new tricks up their sleeve. It just ends up not being good enough. So I'm holding my breath. I'll have some hope that maybe people might start playing Spider-Man Heimdall move. That doesn't sound that great, but maybe it is. So we'll see. And then the last card we have here today is Ghost. Ghost is getting an update as well. So it's going for a 1/2 to a 3/5, which is a lot of stats, honestly. 3/5, I would say, is like the baseline good 3-drop. As long as you have a good ability. If you have a good ability, like, why is Wave a 3/5? Honestly, I don't fully understand why it's a 3/5. I think it could be a 3/4 and be fine. However, that's kind of like the bench point. Like, are you wave level ability with I mean, I can understand why it's a 3/5 because you're giving your opponent a huge buff, but a lot of times, like, they don't even take advantage of it that well, whereas you get to, like, Dr. Doom into Odin, that kind of thing. Anyways, what was I saying? 3/5, I think, is good stats as long as the ability is good enough. Is the ability of always revealing last good in some decks, usually tech-heavy decks that also output power. Now, a 3/5 is a good stat line, so maybe you can build a very high early game power deck while having Ghost in there to retain that late game tech game plan. Like, decks that love this is like Sarah decks, but Sarah decks generally already lose their priority. So it's kind of interesting. There's probably going to be some decks that have really good early game scaling where Ghost fits in, and the 3/5 is a good stat line, so it's not even that bad to run. But it's also an ongoing. Maybe Spectrum is another way of doing it. There's definitely some considerations to be made here, but it's an interesting change considering that Ghost wasn't really seeing play. You were kind of assuming Ghost would be a 1-drop that you auto-include, or you splash in if you need it, but it just ended up being like kind of a weird card. Now as a 3-drop, this is more of a consideration, and it's something to look going forward. I'm really not sure if this will be good. Like, this is the one I have the most like question marks about. Like, I don't know if I have a ready-made deck idea with this change. The stats are nice and the ability is useful at times, but there are also some metas where, like, the Eliath meta, just like this was not ever gonna see play, things like that. So it's definitely a weird card, but it has its moments. Ghost is a similar story to Spider-Man, meaning that it's been pretty bad for a long time. While we evaluate potential changes, we're going to take advantage of a stat improvement to learn more about the effect and its potential impact. We think it's fair to position the effect like a small drawback in the current metagame, as fixing reveal priorities come with greater risks. Most of the strength comes from Ghost being a 1-cost ongoing card, but there are other options for that in Spectrum decks today and likely the future. Yeah, I don't know what they're trying to say, honestly, but yeah, I mean, in some cases it's a drawback. Tech decks, it's a benefit. So I don't know. It's in the right decks, this is a benefit. So I don't know if that's not necessarily true. It's the weirdest one to evaluate. I'd love to see people playtest it and see what their opinion is on this particular change. But overall, those are the 5 changes. Mostly buffs, quote unquote, 2 underplayed cards, Heimdall buffs, Spider-Man 2099. This one they think is a nerf, but I don't think it is a nerf. I think this just helps the curve of destroy decks a lot. So interested to see what the destroy win rate looks like after this change. And then we also have Luke Cage, which I would say is also a buff. So mostly, in my opinion, buffs across the board. But yeah, Overall, it's good. I'm not so I don't really think Destroy needs to get nerfed. I think Destroy is more like the benchmark. People are not building to counter Destroy. People are not building armor, especially with Kyera. So Destroy's stats were good before Kyera came out, and people were playing armor, right, to protect their late game. Now Kyera came out, a lot of people transitioned from armor to Kyera, and then Destroy's stats, which was already good, just got a lot better because you don't have that insta win on 2 if you armor their Deadpool or armor their any of their destroyed tools, they just lose the access, they lose a lot of their power. So I think that's what happened, why Destroyer was looking good. Their stats were good, but then people stopped playing a lot of their counter tools. No one's really running Cosmo at all. Same thing here. And then also Destroy has really good locations. Like there are some really good locations for Destroy that make you auto win essentially, kind of like the rock locations for Deadpool for Darkhawk decks. Some of those locations you just auto win because you get so much value. So that's kind of the 2 issues here for that. And there isn't that much location change. There's like magic players, but no one's really running Scarlet Witch. Quake doesn't really adjust the location, just moves it around, which sometimes matters, but a lot of times you're not moving the destroy location in that way with Quake, so it's usually just Magic and Storm that's doing that. So it's just not as common to see location change in that matchup, and especially early. Like if you see just like a Death's Domain turn 1, you play Deadpool twice there, and you Storm 3 turn 3, you still get so much value off of that. So it's just kind of hard to counter some of those locations. But anyways, that's my thoughts on this particular patch. What do you guys think? You guys like it, hate it? All that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Oh yeah. What do you think about that? Is that distracting? I got it for Christmas, but I never used it. And I wanted to try it just to see. Is it like too distracting? I could change it back. Let me know. But yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be